Good afternoon, Target Individual David Atkins. I'm back with another video. Um, Today I'm going to talk about psychiatry, and I'm reading a chapter called Mind Doctors out of John Hall's book called Guinea Pigs. And it may start off, if you're not interested in the info behind psychiatry and all this, and because what they're doing is they're trying to, the stuff they put us through, gang stalking, direct energy weapons and stuff, and we go talk about it. It's designed to make us look crazy, and the psychiatrists co-sign it and stamp it because, you know what I'm saying, we're showing symptoms of crazy, and they refuse to look at the evidence. And just listen, this is deep video, especially for if you're a real target individual, you're really gonna love this vehicle. The way John Hall explains this, and so it's a cover up. So it's designed not only to drive you insane, but also make it where anybody you go for help, they'll try to call you crazy. And they got and when I'm reading this, it's going to tell you how all this stuff's set up. So when you go complain, it's symptoms of psychiatric, it's symptoms of schizophrenia and stuff like that. And that makes everybody refuse to look into it. And they set these symptoms up in the DSM just like that. So anyway, I'm going to start out with a word of encouragement for my believers. If you're not a believer and you don't want to listen, you can just scroll back through. If you're not a believer and you still want to listen, feel free to. So I'm starting to realize the closer I get to God, suddenly there's a whole bunch of obstacles that weren't there before. So I started to think about deeply. And I came to the conclusion, why would the devil ever attack me when I'm not following God? The whole purpose of demonic possession and the devil's temptations is to steer you away from God. So if I wasn't following God or I wasn't following the path of God, the devil doesn't want anything to do with me. These demons and the devil become furious when they find a soul that's returned back to God. So they end up putting a lot of temptations in front of you, a lot of pain, a lot of trauma to weaken you and weaken you and weaken your spirit. Because when your spirit is weak, you're more likely to sin and you're more likely not to follow the path of God anymore. So it becomes this tug of war of you and the dark side. The key to winning against these demons is to pray, it's to fast, but it's also to be furious and anger. And anger is permissionable emotion, even given to us by God. Use your anger to fuel you, to make you strong, to make you stand tough against all these enemies. Be angry with these evil spirits and with yourself for lack of discipline. It's only when you're furious that's when you finally make the most change towards God, because you need to be relentlessly furious against Satan and all these obstacles in your life. Okay, I'm fixing to start now. And like I said, you can fast forward a little excerpts if you just want to get past the history part, but I'm setting the stage for what's going on with targets and psychiatrists and stuff. So anyway, here we go. And he starts out, a joyful heart is good medicine, but a crushed spirit dries up the bones. And that comes out of Proverbs 17:22. Okay. The word sight comes from the ancient Greek and is interpreted as soul or butterfly. The Royal College of Psychiatrists uses the butterfly as its coat of arms. The term psychiatrist was first coined by physician Johann Christian Reil in 1808 to describe a medical doctor that treats the soul. Prior to the use of the term psychiatrist, mental illness was recognized as a disorder, but treatment was often arcane and barbaric. Lunatic asylums are known to have existed as far as 800 AD in the Middle East. However, England is recognized as having built the first specialty hospital dedicated to lunacy in the 13th century. The Bethlehem Royal Hospital in London was acquired by the City of London by 1547 and was operational until 1948. During most of that time, the institutions were used as primary holding cells with little or no treatment provided. It wasn't until King George III in England, who suffered from bouts of psychosis secondary to porphyria, was treated and his disease placed in remission. That mental illness was seen as treatable. A French physician, Dr. Philippe Pinel, was first to theorize that therapeutic treatment may work in the mentally ill and is regarded as the father of modern psychiatry. As asylums proliferated in Europe and the United States, number of people being forced in them grew exponentially. By the early 1900s, the number of people in asylums in Europe numbered in the hundreds and thousands and was approximately 150,000 in the United States in 1904. Despite the new humane treatment ideas that started in the proliferations of asylums, they had once again become custodial institutions in Europe and the United States, housing both the mentally ill and the destitute. By the early 20th century, psychiatry had hit an all-time low with respect to other medical specialties. In an attempt to bolster the view of psychiatry as a legitimate medical science, two men began to attempt to classify mental illness as symptoms of other biological processes. Emil Kraepelin and Carl Kahlbaum both put forth theories of classifying mental disorders as biological in nature and introduced a plan for more comprehensive forms of psychiatry. This would set the stage for DSM criteria, currently used to classify mental disorders. At the time of this writing, which is 2014, the DSM-4 is currently in use as a diagnostic aid in classifying mental illness. Currently, the DSM-5 is being debated as so to its strengths and weaknesses. There's also currently a grassroots opposition to the DSM-5, which is fairly formidable. At this point, you're probably wondering why there's a chapter on psychiatry included in a book about non-consensual experimentation with non-lethal weapons and directed energy. Allow me to enlighten you. From the beginning, the earliest research sub-projects included MK Ultra, MK Search, and similar projects were aimed at controlling the mind. Almost all of those sub-projects were directed by psychiatrists, driving their funding directly or indirectly from agencies like the CIA, NSA, or DOD. Much of the experimentation was performed on all non-consenting participants who were regarded as expendable in the name of national security. All of these psychiatrists were exposed through FIOA, Freedom of Information Act, and the Rockefeller Commission, as to directing research went on to be hailed as pioneers in their field and had glowing eulogies upon their deaths. All of this despite admissions of performing non-consensual experimentation to Congress and citing the interests of national security for their blatant disregard of victims' rights. It is no mystery that the current victims of electromagnetic weapons research appear to be schizophrenic or suffering from delusional disorder. The technology was painstakingly designed to accurately mimic the symptoms that psychiatrists have determined to fulfill the diagnosis of these respective disorders. As a matter of fact, psychiatrists at the community level have long been used as apologists for non-consensual experimentation. Many of the victims of the early radiation and infectious agent experimentation were told they were delusional or schizophrenic once they started reporting symptoms and seeking medical assistance. Of course, decades later, after many lives were ruined by illnesses and wrongful psychiatric diagnosis, the government did admit to non-consensual experimentation and lame apologies were offered to survivors and families. The last such apology was given by Hillary Clinton to the people of Guatemala for experimentation non-consensually done on them by NIH with syphilis contagion. Of course, the experimentation was done from 1946 to 1948, and the apology was given under duress and media exposure 60 years later in 2010, which is typical of our government. Current examples of very obvious experimentation, such as these victims complaining of electronic harassment and Morgellons disease, are likely in the same boat, awaiting an admission of guilt and apology 50 to 60 years later. For those unfamiliar with Morgellons disease, it's being diagnosed in individuals breaking out with skin lesions from which non-human fiber strands of other material are being removed. Despite a number of physicians sending biopsies for Morgellons lesions to laboratories verifying the presence of non-human matter, the excuse offered by the NIH and the CDC is that these victims suffer from delusional parasitosis. Remember, these are the same two agencies responsible for the Tuskegee syphilis study in the United States and recently exposed syphilis study in Guatemala. I'm certain these victims were told that they were suffering from delusions at the same time as their experimentation as well. It appears as if the DSM-4 was intentionally set up to be able to sidetrack any truth about experimentation from being found. The DSM-5 will be worse, not only for current victims of non-consensual experimentation, but for the population large as well. Upon its initial draft, the DSM-5 was mired in controversy. For the vast number of psychiatrists who support the new criteria, an equally vast number thoroughly oppose it. Fundamentally, the biggest problem with the DSM-5 is essentially no person, no matter how mentally stable, can escape getting some type of diagnosis or mental illness. The first Diagnostic and Statistic Manual of Mental Disorders, or DSM-M, that's what it stands for, was published in 1952 in an attempt to standardize the criteria for diagnosing mental illness. It has been revised several times, with a fifth revision was published in May 2013. The codes in the DSM criteria also coincide with the ICD billing codes, making it easier for psychiatrists to bill their services to a third party, payers. The American Psychiatrists Association has been under fire for the DSM since its inception for both its content and money generated by its publication. Each revision of the manual has included more previously normal behaviors as pathologic, worthy of diagnosis. The current revision, or DSM-5, is no different. The publication of the DSM is closely guarded with copyrights and nets the ADA over $5 million a year. The money generated by the DSM and the influence of some pharmaceutical companies have its own content led to much controversy regarding its use. And I got one more page and I'm getting into the target individual. This is just setting the scene. The DSM thing, letting you understand how this operates. So basically they're saying this new manual that's coming out, anybody that can go to a psychiatrist and say something and they can point out in the manual, oh, this is wrong with you, this is what's wrong with you. Basically they can label anybody whatever they want, eventually, is what he's saying. Well, not anything they want, but they got a mental illness for everything, what I'm saying. Or the symptoms, it's much easier, you know what I'm saying, where you had to have the symptoms are broadening, like for schizophrenia and all that. The DSM-5, released in May 2013, has been surrounding controversy since it began. The most controversial addendum to the DSM is the inclusion of psychosis risk syndrome, also known as attenuated psychosis syndrome. The addendum was intended mainly for individuals hearing whispers in their head, viewing objects as threatening, or suffering from other subjectively psychotic symptoms. It's amazingly coincidental that the APA, fully complicit in the MK Ultra mind experimentation projects, would find a way to include 300,000 plus individuals hearing voices in their head into diagnostic criteria in the DSM-5. For now, the psychosis risk syndrome has been dropped from the final publication. However, I can almost guarantee it will be silently included and as an addendum at a later date once scrutiny is off the APA regarding the list of DSM-5. Dr. Alan Francis, MD, served as chair of DSM-4 task force. Is currently professor of Emeritus of Psychiatry at Duke University School of Medicine. He's been very outspoken against the DSM-5 due to the risk of it medicalizing normality, resulting in glut of unnecessary and harmful drug prescribing. In Psychology Today, he listed the 10 most harmful changes to the DSM-5 and recommends that they not be followed at all. Disrupted mood dysregulation disorder will turn child temper tantrums into a mental disorder, with pharmacological treatment recommended. It's exaggerate the already excessive and inappropriate use of medication in young children. This decision was based upon research from only one group. Normal grief will become major depressive disorder, thus making our normal and necessary emotions reactions to the loss of loved ones a treatable condition. Under this change, grief will be treated with pills and medical interventions rather than family consolidation and pastoral care. The forgetfulness of old age will now be misdiagnosed as minor neurocognitive disorder, creating a huge false positive population of people who have no risk of dementia. The diagnosis of adult attention deficit disorder will be exacerbated, leading to a further widespread misuse of stimulant medications, contributing to the already largely illegally secondary market in diverted stimulants. Excessive eating 12 times within the 3-month period is no longer a manifestation of easy availability of great food. According to the DSM-5, it's a psychiatric illness called binge eating disorder. The new definition of autism in the DSM-5 will result in lower rates of diagnosis. According to the DSM-5 work group, it will decrease by 10%. However, outside research groups are estimating a 50% reduction in the diagnosis. First-time substance abusers will be lumped into definition with hardcore addicts, despite their very first treatment needed and prognosis. The DSM-5 has created a slippery slope in introducing the concept of behavioral addictions that eventually can spread to make a mental disorder out of everything, like we do a lot. The overdiagnosis of internet and sex addiction will undoubtedly contribute to lucrative treatment progress to exploit these new markets. The DSM-5 obscures the already fuzzy boundary between generalized anxiety disorder and the worries of everyday life. This will increase the number of people inappropriately prescribed addictive anti-anxiety medicine. The DSM-5 opens the gate further to the already existing problem of the misdiagnosis of PTSD in forensic settings. According to Dr. Francis, people with real bad psychiatric problems can be reliably diagnosed and effectively treated or badly shortchanged. The DSM-5 will make this worse by driving attentive care resources away from legitimately ill ill and towards people with everyday problems of life who will be harmed, not helped, when they are mislabeled as mentally ill. And here we go. This is the deep part about the target. Such is currently the case of victims of non-consensual experimentation in this country. Almost all the victims have complained of electronic harassment have eventually been seen by psychiatrists, who is more apt to medicalize them into the confines of DSM-4 rather than investigate their claims of experimentation. A cursory Google search would easily lead them into the dark world of organized stalking and electronic harassment. The sheer matter of victims' testimonies, websites, information sites, and humanitarian organizations directed to addressing electronic harassment should steer an ethical psychiatrist into seeing the reality of this issue. However, because the practice of psychiatry is pharmaco-financially driven, the victim is found within the parameters of the DSM-4- soon to be DSM-5 and placed in treatment. Since most victims are in their late 30s to 50s with no history of psychiatric illness, they're usually spared the diagnosis of schizophrenia in favor of a delusional disorder or non-bizarre type. Delusional disorder is divided into subtypes of bizarre and non-bizarre, and further broken down into persecurity, grandiose, jealous, erotomanic, and somatic. Non-bizarre means that the victim complaints are plausible, just not in their case. The victim's then placed on psychotropic drugs that will not help, and financially strapped with $300 an hour. Psychiatrists visit with their doctor will try to convince them of their delusional status, while their perpetrators continue whispering in their ears, "We told you so." Whoa, I can relate. What the reader should glean from my rant on psychiatry is this. In medical school, one can spot the individuals destined for psychiatry on day one. For the most part, they are strange individuals, are often searching for self-help, and remain strange individuals through their career, as physicians focus on what they see as the more intellectual practice of the medicine. Many chose psychiatry out of fear of treating patients, or seeing their blood, sputum, urine, or feces, or that of us in real fields of medicine must deal with on a daily basis. Psychiatry, unlike all other fields of medicine, has absolutely no basis in hard science. Since there's no lab test or MRI to diagnose crazy, clusters of behaviors are corralled into this group and given big medical names to stimulate a diagnosis, mostly for medical billing purposes. Billing is a large part of psychiatry. Most psychiatrists will not take insurance and charge an average of $300 per hour. However, you can find psychiatrists online on telehealth now for $100, $150 range. And I know that for a fact. But that's still high for people who don't have nothing, and targets who broke down and don't even have a life. And why would they want to go to psychiatrists anyway? I'm just saying, they try to trick you into thinking you need medicine and all that. Okay. All right, most will not take insurance and charge $300. Hence, the true mentally ill, the homeless, are left untreated in favor of treating the people with average life stresses with pharmaceutical drugs that can generate billions of dollars to fund even more psychiatric residency programs. One can see from the changes proposed in the DSM-5 that the ultimate goal of the APA is to medicate every man, woman, and child on the continent eventually. That fact shouldn't be too difficult to understand, since I illustrated the fact that the APA has been deeply involved with the CIA for quite some time. Their recommendations have altered society for the worse and have resulted in a proliferation of pharmaceutical whose side effects far outweigh their efficiency. You see my movements, don't you? That's called from psychiatric medicine. Tardive dyskinesia. Yeah, that's what psychiatric medicines do. Okay. Moreover, psychiatry has been the punitive arm of most DOD, federal, state, and local government agencies who have learned they can discredit and marginalize whistleblowers very easily with the psychiatrists who are paid to give an individual a damning diagnosis. If you're a victim of electronic harassment or have been mandated to see a psychiatrist for any reason for that matter, you must remember that the doctor behind the desk may not be your enemy, but he's also looking out for your best interests. But he's also not looking out for your best interests. Apart from hearing a bunch of impressive medical terms for mental illness, none of which are based on scientific evidence, the janitor cleaning his office at the end of the day knows as much about the human mind as he does. In closing, as a medical student, I remember seeing, this is John Hall talking, not me, and he wrote a book called Guinea Pig, and that's what I'm just saying. I'm not saying I'm a medical student. As a medical student, I remember seeing a video skit of a physician doing a parody of the infamous General Patton speech in front of an American flag. He changed the famous closing line to read as follows. When you're old and gray, sitting on your front porch, sipping your mint julep with your grandson on your knee, he You may ask, Grandpa, what did you do in the Great War on Disease? You sure as hell don't want to say, well, I did psychotherapy. That's all I got today, folks. And what I'm going to say, I will do another video tomorrow. I hope y'all keep y'all's heads up. And I'm still researching thought amplifier and mind interface, and I'm probably going to come out with it tomorrow. I just thought this is very important for any TI who's going through this to know what they do and how they steer us towards this stuff and make every symptom that we come in and tell them gang stalk and all that make us seem crazy. I know y'all already knew this, but I know this information right here is pretty deep, and if you're into studying stuff like that. Anyway, God bless y'all. Y'all have a wonderful day.